Hi, my name is Christopher Malcolm, and welcome to Movable Canvas, where we talk about cinema, arts, culture, and where those three things sometimes intersect. In today's episode, we'll go to the White House with Rob Reiner's 1995 romantic comedy, The American President. They say politics makes strange bedfellows, and I guess the same could be said for the movies. Even when we live in such polarized times, movies somehow have an ability to float above the fray of our consciousness. The American President, a romantic comedy starring Michael Douglas and Annette and written by the prolific screenwriter Aaron Sorkin, tells the story of Andrew Shepard, a recently widowed single father who just happens to be the President of the United States. One day, at what must surely be the first and only meet-cute in Oval Office history, President Shepard finds himself on the receiving end of a challenge from an environmental lobbyist, Sidney Ellen Wade, played by Annette Bening. Both negotiations and chemistry ensue, and by the end of the meeting, President Shepard finds himself less concerned about Wade's political agenda and more concerned with whether or not the beautiful woman he's just met is single. Now, I realize that some viewers, if you haven't seen the movie from that simple description, might get the impression that it's not such a comedic setup after all. Some viewers, especially female viewers, I'd imagine, might be turned off by the idea that a working woman just trying to do her job might be seen as an object of affection for the most powerful man in the world rather than a professional equal. Dating one's subordinate is always complicated, even more so when one of those people is the President of the United States. But rather than seeking to be a 2-hour promotion of sexual harassment in the workplace, the story is really focused on the opposite side of that story. Can the most powerful man on earth also just be a man? Is someone that the entire country has chosen to lead them on the world stage also free to have a life of his own? Can he fall in love? And if he does, how much say does the public have in who he falls in love with? How do we define character? As the film dives into, politicians spend a great deal of time professing their own commitment to family values, but which families? Who gets to define these values? Without getting into a political value discussion here, it's safe to say that the filmmakers behind the film come from what we in America would call the liberal end of the spectrum. Never once have I considered that to be a bad thing, since, if you must know, most of the politics in the film mirror my own, and the views certainly mirror the beliefs of screenwriter Aaron Sorkin. This was his third script after Catching Fire with a Few Good Men. I'm pretty sure that the cut footage from this film formed the start of what would eventually become The West Wing. A usual 2-hour film script is about 120 pages. Aaron Sorkin's first draft of The American President was 385, so he had plenty of leftover material. Film is generally thought of as a director's medium, and for the most part it is. But few screenwriters have ever been able to put such a noticeable signature on their film work as Aaron Sorkin. Even when he isn't directing himself, you always know when you're watching an Aaron Sorkin movie. The dialogue is just so incredibly specific that it's a world of its own. Whether it be The American President, A Few Good Men, The Social Network, The Trial of the Chicago 7, this man knows how to write a monologue. But the draw of the film for me is not the political speechifying, although the speeches are amazing. So much so that an Australian politician a few years ago was literally caught plagiarizing one of his speeches during his own campaign, and he's not the only politician to do that. Instead, the draw of the film was that it's just so beautifully romantic. The film makes no effort to hide the influence of Frank Capra and other romantic comedy directors of the Golden Age. There's even a scene with the White House guard that mentions Capra by name. The film is unrepentantly romantic. Power imbalances aside, these two human beings really do fall in love with one another. He's the most powerful man on earth, but he's also a lonely widower, and Sidney Ellen Wade offers him a genuine human experience that he desperately craves. A human experience, coincidentally, that ultimately makes him a better man and, by extension, a better president. While rewatching the film recently, the Frank Capra connection brought to mind a quality shared between both this film and Capra films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In fact, I think it's something of a requirement for the entire genre of romantic comedy that I think will often determine whether or not you enjoy the movie or not. Simply put, you have to be able to suspend disbelief. This is true for any narrative film, but it's especially true for romantic comedies where the initial premises often tend to strain plausibility. Often we are asked to leave our own political and social beliefs at the door and simply get lost in a great story. I'd even say that this is one of the greatest gifts movies have to offer. They allow us to leave our troubles at the front doorstep of the Cineplex and just be in the moment. But I do find it interesting how sometimes that can even be difficult, even for a movie as pure-hearted as The American President. When the film was released in 1995, we were in the midst of a love fest with Bill Clinton. We still believed in the idea of a hip everyman sitting on the country's powerful throne. And it wasn't hard to imagine someone like Andrew Shepard, a generally decent man, falling in love without ulterior motives, raising a smart kid on his own and championing him regardless of our own political persuasion. I mean, I know it's hard to imagine these days, where I think the only bipartisan thing we can actually agree on is that the other side is purely evil, and the toxicity of our own political discussion makes any sensible discussion seem like an impossibility. But in 1995, while we were clearly still had our own political divisions, we still lived in a world where voting for the opposite party wasn't akin to worshiping the devil. We were still able to disagree without being disagreeable. So the political side of American presidents seemed, at least to me, not to be such a divisive issue. Democrat or Republican, we could all envision ourselves standing in front of a press conference and giving one of those rousing speeches that didn't so much celebrate a single party, but rather lifted up a nation. But of course, I have to admit that in recent years, when a very specific person occupied the highest office, I did find it harder to watch the film. It's silly, I know, but the world itself seemed to have shifted to such a place that it was hard to watch a light movie about an American president, any president, without the reality of the world intruding on my enjoyment of the film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, but I didn't watch it for 4 whole years. I mean, I couldn't. I just couldn't suspend disbelief. I couldn't look at anything having to do with the White House, even a fictional one, without thinking about real-world politics. Even the lesser of the man in the White House at the time the film was released has its own questions. I mean, the film was released in 1995. In 1998, President Clinton and the country would find themselves embroiled in the Monica Lewinsky scandal, a real-life story of a real-life man taking advantage of a subordinate for romantic needs, although romantic might be a bit of a strong term. I imagine if the American president had been released in 1998 instead of 1995, the question of whether or not it was okay for an American president to hit on a lobbyist might have been viewed in an entirely different way. One thing is a movie, one thing is real life, but the questions remain. I mentioned earlier that this film is very much in chorus with the films of Frank Capra. You know, we all think of the great scene in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where Jimmy Stewart refuses to cede the congressional floor by filibustering in order to buy time for his bill. It's one of the great moments of movie history, universally loved. But in the current political environment, in the real world, where both parties have wielded the filibuster as a cudgel and has become a roadblock to getting really anything done in Washington, is it still possible to view the act of filibustering in such a positive way, even in the movie? I would argue that it is. I mean, that movie is just that good. And movies are of this world, but they don't necessarily have to be about this world. It's okay every now and then to just get lost in the dream of it all. You don't have to be a liberal to enjoy Michael Douglas telling Richard Dreyfuss's rival politician that his 15 minutes are up. You don't really have to feel one way or another about the filibuster to be rooting for Jimmy Stewart to get his bill passed. We'd all do best to just step back for a moment and enjoy these times when we can share things in common and those things can bring us together, instead of always dwelling on the things that tear us apart. With a movie that takes place in the world of politics, it's impossible to have our view of the film not somewhat impacted by the politics of the moment we live in. But if we are able to suspend disbelief just for those 2 hours, great romantic comedies like The American President have the power to bring the joy into our lives that you're never going to get from the 6 o'clock news. Movies can make us believe in love and believe in ourselves. That's just me, though. Let me know what you think. Now, I do have a specific request. Hopefully, let's try to avoid any specific political policy debates here. This is a movie channel, not a politics channel, so let's not let our comment section turn into a reflection of our ongoing political rancor. Rather, what I'm interested to know from you is your view of the intersection of movies and politics. Do you find yourself influenced in one way or another based on the politics of a film? Are you able to let all that go and simply enjoy a movie for what it is? And how do we preserve cinema as the communal experience it often is that allows us to tell stories that bring us together instead of tearing us apart? Thanks for watching. Do hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, and can't wait to talk to you next time. Until then, have a nice day.